So we're here. You heard who we are. We're Mark and Christene Bailey. We have been at Foothills for about 15 years. We have 2 adult kids by birth, and we have Will Hale, our son-in-law, and Alyssa Bailey, our daughter-in-law. And we have a grandson, Owen. And where's Brianna?
Yeah, we
our
have
other
an adopted
there she is.
daughter,
there she
too,
is.
Brianna.
Christene and I have been involved here. We originally were quite involved in doing high school small groups, and then of late, for the last 5 or 6 years, we've been doing the pre-marriage, pre-engagement class.
I guess if you stay married long enough, they'll just let you do anything.
Well, yeah, we have been married 31 years, actually 376 months to be exact. It sounds like a long time. It is.
Some of those months, they were really long years, those months.
Yeah, they were.
Some were like a day.
And that might be why we do the marriage class. Yeah. So. Christine and I, what we're going to talk to you about tonight is something that's really important to us. We're kind of geeks, Christine and I are. Not many of you know that. Maybe all of you know that, I don't know. But we spend a lot of time analyzing things and trying to figure out like why certain things work, why certain things don't work, why certain people seem to live a life of peace and others don't. And so we often reflect like what separates like real success and failure, like in every aspect of life. And we've spent like hours over dinner talking about this very topic. In the world, you have a lot of like self-empowerment and like people taking the path of least resistance. That's very popular in our secular world, which leads to thinking we should avoid hard things. That's kind of the way it all lands for us, is that hard things are to be avoided, gotten around, over, through, whatever you need to do. But what we're here to talk to you about tonight is doing hard things so life isn't so hard, okay? You're up.
Thanks. So our story, just briefly, our story is that we actually both are San Diego kids. We were raised here. We actually met in junior high, but we didn't date until we were college age. We were both super, I'm gonna have to take my glasses off because there's like a glare. We were both super, probably you could say intense. We were intentional
very
people,
serious.
Very serious people. We both had a plan for our life, none of which actually worked out, but we did have a plan. We met and we started dating when we were 19, and we were very purposeful as individuals, and as a couple. We both were raised to be believers. We went to Christian high, so we knew God. We had strong principles to follow, and all of that worked. But our intentions are mostly carried out in our own power. And over time, later in life, we learned that doing hard things was not about our strength. It was about submission to and hearing the voice of God as we face challenges and hardships. That seems like a very small distinction, but it's not. It's a really big one. And that's what we learned was we decided to analyze what made the difference for us, what led us into the things we value in life, and what kind of pulled us away. And here we are.
And honestly, if you'd have asked us 5-10 years into our marriage, that very question, we would have had a very different answer than we sit here tonight with.
So we're old, so listen to us.
We're old. We've been married 376 months. I mean, we're up there. But I want you all to hear me carefully. I was crazy determined, and I was crazy disciplined. It was something I was gifted with from a young age. I was always very disciplined. And unfortunately, those traits gave me positive feedback in my life. Being determined, working hard, and being very diligent and disciplined, I got some attaboys in life. I got pats on the back. I was rewarded. And so what that did to me is it kind of reinforced that. And I started to double down. And what does that look like? That looks like perfectionism. I was a workaholic. I was so determined and focused to accomplish the goals that were before me, no matter what was in front of me. Okay? But that's not the way that God's called us to approach life. And it worked until the challenges were too hard, and then I finally had to go to God, okay, instead of going to God first and following him through this process. And along the way, it built pride and like a never-ending pursuit of more discipline and perfectionism. Because as you start to try to relinquish control, those things, you start doubling down, and it's harder and harder and harder, okay? This approach sees difficulties, though, as trophies. Do you hear what I'm saying? Like, when you approach something hard and you're a disciplined and determined person, you kind of put that success that you got through that or over it, around it, you kind of put it on a shelf as a trophy, like, hey, I earned that. You know, that was hard won. You know, I did that. And rather than opportunities for God to move and teach me. So that's a little setup on where I was.
So why do hard things? Why would we actually pursue looking for the hard things in life and doing them? Well, here's what we learned over time. And if you have a pen and paper, you should write this down, because this is the first principle that we're going to tell you about tonight. There's only two. So
you're going to notice that anytime you're to write down, it's Christene that's speaking. So take note of that.
Well, we'll see. The principle of hard things over time. Here is the key to what we learned through a lot of battles and doing it the wrong way. So the principle of hard things over time is that the more intentional and immediate our response is to difficulties in life, the less time overall we will spend in hardship. So the more quickly you assess and deal with something, the less time overall you will spend dealing with it. This requires a grounding in godly principles, a pursuit of knowledge, and it involves self-sacrifice. It means that you're going to go headlong into things you know are hard because you want to learn and grow and pursue God's will for your life instead of avoiding. And I know you guys know that the world we're living in right now does not say to do this in general. It's something you have to practice and you get better at, but we'll talk more about that later.
So a primary scripture we want to talk to you about is Matthew 7, 13, and 14. This is something most of us know. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. So in the context of what we're talking about tonight, doing hard things, if you kind of dissect some of these words here, narrow and small, that's hard, okay? Broad and wide, that's easy. So God is really focusing us here, that is one of the keys for us as we approach this. So we want to talk about hard things in our personal lives, okay? Let's just name a few out of the gate. Education, career, health. All those things can present some hard situations for us. Like, for example, you're in a job you don't enjoy or that isn't compensating you as you'd like. But what if that was a better experience or a pathway to a better life? If it was actually you're doing something hard that's ultimately going to reward you in a different way. Early in my career, so I've been self-employed my entire career. And Christene told you that we planned. We had all kinds of crazy good plans and really good strategies and
schemes and dreams.
We thought it all through, and we were on a track. But my first career job, I've been in commercial real estate and finance and investments my entire career. My first career job, I'm 23 years old, and I'm in commercial real estate brokering apartment buildings. And
sounds super glamorous, huh?
Yeah, super fun. And it was the hardest 24 months of my life. I probably worked on average 80 hours a week, And I was getting the attaboys. I mean, I was getting all those things that we were talking about because I was diligent, I was determined. I was always one of those people, you tell me what to do, I'll do it, okay? And give me a formula and I'll do it. But it was a horrible time in the economy, and in 24 months, I made $1,100. So, yeah.
No, you didn't hear that wrong.
Yeah, you didn't hear that wrong.
$1,100.
And along the way, though, the reason I'm setting that up for you is along the way in that, and I had majored in finance in school, and so there was other opportunities. And so I interviewed for a couple jobs along the way, because this was a struggle. This was like a hard thing. And Christine and I, every time that opportunity presented itself, we prayed about it, and God just said no, and stay the course. Because you're gonna sacrifice something. Like if you do this, you're gonna give something up in the long term. You're gonna gain something in the short term, but you're gonna give something up in the long term. Another example is like education. Education is a really good thing to talk about here in doing hard things, because it's one of those things that you sacrifice. It's hard. I mean, I don't think anybody here would say education's easy. I mean, maybe there's some like really intelligent savant in here, but education's hard. It costs you money, it costs you time, and it costs you opportunity. Like you could be doing something else when you're getting education. But is that what it takes to fulfill a dream you have or something that God gave you to do? That's like a requirement. That's something to get you over the threshold that you need to do. And if you're older, you know, I've heard this so many times. Well, I'm 25 and I just figured out what I want to do and I don't want to go back to school. Who cares? Like if that's something God's calling you to do and that's the ticket to do what you need to do, who cares? It can be the difference for you. It could be a major difference.
Yeah, another way that doing hard things works out in your personal life is having hard conversations. This is probably one everyone deals with at least some point in their life. Having a conversation you don't want to have, right? Setting personal boundaries is important as an adult. You guys are all learning that, right? You're adulting, and so you're setting boundaries, but it's not enough. Sometimes you have to pursue having a conversation that is uncomfortable. Sometimes you have to learn how to say what you need. That's hard for some people to do. And some of us have been taught not to say what we need, right? Like we're raised to not say what we need, but it's actually an important thing to learn. I'm not talking about stomping your feet and kicking and screaming and demanding what you need. I'm saying being able to communicate.
That's a tantrum.
That's a tantrum. Yeah. That's a tantrum. It's about having a conversation. So for example, I was raised by a very strong, very disciplinarian, very confident Italian father. And I don't know if any of you know what that means, but let's just say he was intimidating. And we were raised to kind of follow directions, right? Well, then I grow up and I get married, and there are some things that I know that Mark and I, decisions we're making for our life that probably my dad's not gonna be real excited about. He's just not. And I had to immediately, actually I had to have a conversation with my dad right before our wedding and right after we got back from our honeymoon and kind of say what my expectations were to let him know that this is now my priority. He is my husband. We are a team. And I'm not under your authority anymore. I respect you. I love you. But now this is where my allegiance is. Those conversations are hard to have, but it's important. And it's important that you learn to do it now when you're young. Another example is finding out what you need to know. So not necessarily saying what you need for yourself, but getting the information you need to make wise decisions. I have a really good friend who, she got married about the same time we did, and she told me right before their wedding that he just refused to talk about his childhood. It was just too painful. He didn't want to burden her with it. It was just something he wanted to forget and move on. They were married for 25 very painful years, and they had 2 children who had to walk through 25 painful years as their children. And most of their struggles were related to things that happened to him as a child that she was completely in the dark about. So, this is another example of having a hard conversation when you need to have it. Again, this is all determined, all of these things we're talking about is a pursuit of the Lord, a pursuit of his will for your life, of knowledge of him, pursuit of his wisdom, understanding and discerning the times where you see something and you go, man, I don't want to go there, but I know I gotta, because it's important for you and for your family.
Yeah, in this concept of pursuing hard things, another area is when things seem hopeless. I mean, there's a lot of times where we just can't see a way. There's nothing that we with our own eyes or our own mind can come up with this is our way through this. I mean, I remember it was yesterday. This is probably about 10, 12 years ago. I was involved in it with a partnership, and we had a guy, a very wealthy guy, who was impossible. He was an alcoholic, and he was mean, and he was just a nasty human being. And he was a real impediment, and we were actually on the cusp of possibly losing the project because of his actions or inactions. And I was the person, funny enough, that was the person that was dealing with him. So I was the point person in trying to work with him, and he hated me, okay? Because I kept bringing these issues up and trying to resolve them with him. And it had come to a head. He was cursing me out by emails. He would get drunk in the middle of the night and send these just vile emails out. And so finally, I don't even know why, I go, I'm going to go meet with him. Because we were down to either going to legal action, or we didn't know. We didn't know how we were going to get around this. And I had about a 40-minute drive to the meeting with him. And I was like, God, I don't even know why I'm going to this. I feel like you led me to do this. I don't know why. I don't even know if we had actually gotten to the point where we had hired a private investigator and done a little bit of background work on him, because we were trying to figure out, how do we get around this guy? And we found out he had a domestic violence with a former wife. So I'm like, this guy's kind of whacked. And I don't even know what I'm walking into, because it was a one-on-one meeting with me and him. So I'm just sitting there, God, I don't know what to do. And the night before, he had sent one of those just crazy vile emails to me. All right, here I go. So drive up there, go to the door of the place we're meeting. He comes to the door, greets me. He shakes my hand, says, hi, Mark. He says, come on in. We sit down. He goes, what do you need? And for some reason, we had drafted the partnership amendment that we needed from him that would take him out of a position of authority and let us do what we needed to do. I had it in a little folder. And I said, I need you to sign this. He said, okay. He signed it, and I left. That was the meeting. I mean, just as I described it, that was the meeting. I got in my car, and I started crying. I was like, God, I couldn't even envision, God, that you would do something like this. But it was, because it was one of those hardest things I've ever had to do, is to actually conjure up the courage to go to this meeting that I knew was a waste of time. It was check the box before we go to legal action. I walked out, and the meeting was about 3 minutes. And I walked out with what we needed. And it changed the course of the entire project. Everything worked. He was still a pain in the neck, but he couldn't do anything. We kind of boxed him into a corner, and he just sat there for the next 7 years. But that's hard things, okay?
So another thing that you may deal with are hard things in marriage. And some of you...
Hard things in marriage?
I know. 300 and how many?
76.
76 months. Nary a trouble.
Once or twice.
Once or twice. Hard things in marriage. Listen, everyone, you've probably heard a lot of people talk about marriage, and pretty much everyone will admit to you, I only have known one person who said, we never had an argument, and that was Mark's grandpa.
And I had watched them argue.
Yeah. I mean, everyone, you're going to have trouble if you get married. But, again, the principle of doing hard things means that when you see trouble, you deal with it, and you act on whatever the Lord gives you to do. but it will probably involve personal sacrifice. My experience was that when Mark and I had been married about 9 years, and some of you might know this story already, but I'll tell it briefly. We began to have a lot of struggles. We had our two children were really small, and I had been, as I've told you, driven. I had this fantasy of having a big career, and I did like my career, and I could have gone forward, but I really had been. I really felt the Lord leading me to being mostly a stay-at-home mom. So I was home now with these 2 toddlers, and let me tell you, if you've had a career job and then you have 2 toddlers, it's nothing alike, not at all. You get no positive feedback, you don't get raises, you don't get, there's nothing, you don't get bonuses, you're just there all day. And so I was struggling with that. I gotta be honest, I was struggling. And Mark, Mark had grown up with a single mom, and suddenly he had the responsibility of being mostly the provider for our family and trying to figure out if he could do that. And so there was a lot of stress in our home. And one particular night, we had a very difficult conversation. I went into our room, closed the door, literally got down on the floor on my face because I don't know, I had heard some spiritual person say that they did that, and so I was like, well, I guess that's what you do when you're desperate. So I'm laying, I'm face down on the floor, I'm crying, like, Lord, he doesn't love me anymore, make him love me. And the Lord literally, one of the few times, I won't say it happens all the time, one of the few times the Lord spoke to me literally out loud, and he said, do you love him? And I just remember, I'm sure I was offended. Like, what? What kind of question is that? Like, we're talking about him.
You talk to God like that?
No, I didn't. But I feel like I would have. Knowing me then, I feel like I would have. The Lord brought there's a few more things to the story, but in the end, within a few minutes, the Lord brought my attention to a wall hanging that we had that was 1 Corinthians 13 as a love chapter. And God just started showing me that I was not patient, that I was not kind, that I did not bear all things, that I absolutely kept a record of wrongs. And the list goes on. But God wanted to show me what love really was. He wanted me to take my focus off what Mark wasn't doing and put my focus on what I needed to be doing. And that was very painful. But God heard my prayer. And you know what? He did love me. I just couldn't see it because I was so wrapped up in my own stuff. That sacrifice paid off in spades. It didn't feel good at the time. But saying, okay, God, it's not working the way I'm doing it. I'm going to trust you and do it your way, made such a difference for us. It's always easier to focus on the other guy. Always easier.
So along the lines of hard things in marriage, I think probably one of the hardest things in marriage or in any situation is counseling. Because for us, along the way, when we were struggling, I had resisted counseling. We had gone to one along the way. It was a horrible experience, and I had just kind of resisted it. But for 2 primary reasons. I didn't want to deal with the hardship. I knew it was going to be hard. Okay, because you're crawling into the mess when you go to counseling. I mean, it's like the mess is right there, and you're saying, I'm running headlong into it, okay? And then it also, to me, it seemed like it was an admission of how bad things really were. Like, okay, if we do this, I'm actually acknowledging that this isn't working, and I need help. And that was a lot to think about. But in the midst of a disagreement one morning, it was like, okay, I don't know that we have any other options. And I said to her, I think we need to go to counseling. And I don't think there is an experience that it epitomizes doing hard things like counseling. Because
Personal or marriage counseling.
Personal
yeah.
or marriage. Mm-hmm. But I just want to encourage you all here. Like, there are things in your life that you will run up against that are very difficult to deal with without some other person who's objective, who loves the Lord, coming alongside you and helping you gain clarity and understanding to that situation. I highly recommend it. I mean, it literally, we would not be sitting here.
Absolutely.
We would not be sitting here. It saved us.
I mean, the Lord saved us, but
Through
through counseling.
Yeah, through counseling. Another thing along the way here is this whole idea of hard things. And we've learned this. We've learned it the hard way, and we've also observed this. It's like when you start facing the same problem over and over again, like relationships, maybe a job, you can't keep a job, or you always have problems with like your boss or somebody in authority over you, those are like signals. Those are kind of loops or patterns. And those are opportunities. I look back and I know for myself, I won't speak for Christine, but I know for myself, there was times where I kind of went through the same thing, over some years. But it was kind of at the end of the day, it was kind of the same exact thing that I went through. And in looking back, in the context of this doing hard things, those were opportunities. And see, part of the problem with the way I'm made up is I'm really strategic, I'm a great planner, and I can really see how things play out in my mind. So hard things for me were opportunities to get around, over, through, and just to leave that thing cleanly behind, never to be seen again. But you know what? That thing came back in a different form, and that thing came back looking a different way to me. And so what I came to realize is that first time, God had something to teach me, and I got around him. I figured a way around that issue.
And he'll let you keep doing that, but you're going to keep doing the thing too.
And so I just want to put, it's always easier if you kind of know what to look for, and you're kind of on the alert. So if there's like patterns and loops that you're going through in your life, that might just be a thing that God's trying to get your attention with. And it might be a time to look at it with a different eye than this is just something to get over or get through. What does God want me to learn here that's going to be integral for me as I go forward in fulfilling the plans and purposes he has for me? So another area of hard things. Not any of you are parents in here, I don't think.
Katie is.
Katie is, yes, right.
Danny is.
But hard
Danny
things.
is.
Hard things in parenting. I don't know if that sounds right, but there's a couple hard things that come along in parenting. There's an amazing example in the Bible, Abraham and Isaac. We all know the story, Genesis chapter 22. Abraham's been called to do the hardest thing imaginable. I mean, we can't even hardly conceive of what God has called him to do. But I think part of the problem is we focus on what God called him to do, not on Abraham and what he did, okay? So I'm just going to read a couple of the text here. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. So what do we learn here? Abraham responded immediately. He got up the next morning and headed out. So now he's traveled 3 days. So think about this incredibly hard thing that he's been called to by God. He now has to travel for 3 days with his son. I mean, there couldn't have been a second in that journey that he wasn't thinking about this, that he wasn't just overwhelmed and heavy with what he's been called to do, but he's doing it, okay? It goes on to say, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said. "But where is this lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. Abraham is moving into obedience, but he's still hopeful, okay? He hasn't given up hope that somehow this is not going to have to go the way he's been called to do this. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of the enemies, the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. From this comes the most unimaginable blessing that is resulting from his obedience and his faith in God. I mean, this is one of the hardest things that he did, but look what came from that.
Yeah, and along, well, sort of in a same but different way, another way that you may face hard things in parenting is not in not in obedience, but, well, I guess it's all still obedience, but actually in your response to things that happen. So when Mark and I first were coming to a place of having, kind of deciding it was time to have children and being ready, we went through 3 miscarriages. And they were difficult, and each one was subsequently more difficult as we went on. Because, as you can imagine, you start to wonder if you'll ever be able to have a child. And fear and anxiety had always been my struggle. That had been where the enemy attacked me anyway. And it was starting to make it very difficult for me to think about trying again and having another baby. And it would have been easy to allow that to keep me from, to keep us from even trying again. It would have been easy to allow that to carry on and make me fearful, not just about pregnancy, but then, okay, I've made it through the pregnancy, what's birth gonna be like? And then, oh gosh, I gotta worry about crib death. And now I've gotta worry about my toddler running in front of a car. And now I gotta worry about when they go to school, are they okay? Are they safe? I gotta worry about daycare. You could go on and on and on if you allow that. But the Lord really showed me early on, Christine, you cannot allow yourself to follow this through. You must choose right now whether you're going to trust me or not. That was a difficult thing. Not only that, but I also had to be, as a parent, I had to be willing to let my kids not like me. I had to, Katie knows, right? Poor thing. I had to be willing to let them not like me. I knew that my children only had one mom, and that I had to give up the idea of being friends to be a good mom to them. I also needed God's help every day to set aside my pride as a parent, to learn to apologize when I was wrong. And to seek God's wisdom to parent well. So in this, we're just, again, trying to reiterate this idea that it is a choice at every stage of your life. How you choose to pursue the things that come up, that rise up in you, that are attacks from the enemy, or just a response to pain that you have, is a choice. And you must, the sooner you address it, the less time you will spend in it.
So as our parenting years kind of started to grow, it really brought up, so a little background on me. I was an only child and raised in a Christian home, and like out of the blue at 12 years old, my parents divorced. And so I was raised by a single mom from that point forward. And at that point, we had been a middle-class family. When my parents divorced, my mom and I were very lower class. And it had caused a lot of issues for me, just struggling, not wanting to be without, and it brought on a whole bunch of things. But as we started parenting, and as my son got to the age I was when my parents divorced, and this wasn't conscious, by the way, this is just, it started happening. I started getting really frustrated with him because it'd be like, Michael, it's time to mow the lawn. It's Saturday. And, he'd give me all kinds of grumbling, and I'm like, are you kidding me? You have a lawn. More than that, you have a home. I mean, I didn't have any of that. And so I started just really kind of being hard on him. He was being a normal kid. But I was thinking back to like, my gosh, I would have given anything to live in the house we live in. I'd have given anything to have a lawn and 2 parents. And, so it was really this hard thing that was all of a sudden now facing me from my kids. And it caused me, I remember a conversation with Christene after I had like kind of gotten on Michael about something, and she didn't do it in front of the kids, but she's like, I think your reaction has way more to do with something else than it does with Michael not wanting to mow the lawn. And so that caused me, I had to go back into counseling, that thing I just told you I love to do. But it took me to the place where I had to actually sit down with both of my kids. And I had to acknowledge and apologize for what I'd done. Those sound like words that you can just say. That was really hard. I mean, that took a lot to sit here and think, okay, these kids that I'm disciplining, that I want to respect me, that I have to get through this life and I want them to be functioning adults, I have to now kind of back up, acknowledge my problems, ask for their forgiveness. But you know what? God was so faithful in that. I believe if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have the relationship. I probably would have lost my kids as far as the close relationship that we have. And I'm so thankful. But I'm telling you what, that was hard. But God, again, I didn't see how it was going to work. I didn't know, but I moved toward him in that. And he made the way.
Yeah, it's really important. We keep talking about us doing hard things and you doing hard things. Again, you're partnering with the Lord in this. You're pursuing his will for you. It's not just an I am, I will, I choose. It is an absolute submission of your heart, mind, and soul to his plan for your life. And that takes guts in itself, right? Like that alone is such a big deal. But it's so important. We even had, noticed that as our kids got older, and some of you probably have lived this, there was more happening. We had soccer, we had volleyball, we had youth group, we had all these things happening, and there was also a just constant demand on our time. And it was even just choosing to say no to things and asking the kids to say no to things and to teach them that they had to prioritize things and choose things for their own health. That was part of us trying to help them learn how to do hard things for themselves, right? Like because that's hard. You want to do everything when you're a kid. Then you get old like us and you're like, 8 p.m. sounds like a good time to go to bed.
But in doing that, we were disappointing people. I mean, it was like we knew there was people that were disappointed because we were saying no. We were saying no to things. We were saying no to some further sports activities and with coaches and all kinds of stuff. But we knew that was important for us to do.
And we had been doing these things, we were learning to do this a little bit along the way. So it got easier. The harder the issues were that we faced, it got easier because we'd been exercising those muscles.
I want to share with you all the hardest thing I've ever done. And the reason I'm sharing it with you is because we went into this, it's not just me, it was us, but we went into this with no ability to see how this was going to work or what God was going to do, but we had to move forward in this thing. So I mentioned that I'm an only child. My mom was single, and Christine and I had always planned that we were going to help my mom at some point because she didn't have a husband, and she was probably going to need help when she got older. So for a whole season, we looked for homes with like a guest house, a granny flat, whatever. And we were always thinking, like, we'll take care of her physically. So if you go back about 7-8 years ago, started having a few little things. And by the way, like, I am the golden son. I'm her only son, but like I'm really special to my mom. I'm kind of a big deal to her.
She says he never gave her a moment's trouble.
Yes, she does.
And I tell her, he saved it all for me.
Yeah, but so I'm setting the stage for it. But we were committed to helping her, and all of a sudden, we kind of started having a few little strange things happen, like her forgetting things, There was an incident where we got a call, and she was at a mall in a store, and she'd been there for a couple hours and couldn't find her car. We ran over, dealt with that. There was some issues with her being a little like kind of prickly with us even, which was really strange because I'm her favorite. And
Her only.
yeah, well, yeah. But anyway, we started realizing there were some things going on, and then all of a sudden we had a health issue with her. She had lymphoma. We had to step in, and oh, by the way, I'm telling you all this. This was like at the busiest time in my entire career. I mean, I was over this like 3 or 4 years. I don't even know how it worked, but I had to step in and deal with her. And so after her lymphoma, she went through chemotherapy, and that changed her. Okay. And after that, we really started noticing some problems. Well, I really need to shorten the story, but we realized that my mom has dementia. You guys know what dementia is, dementia Alzheimer's, okay? So she was starting to have some significant cognitive issues. And so through that, we got her into neurology, and then she was diagnosed with dementia. And kind of on an emergency, we had to move her in with us for about 4 months. And so we had our eyes and our hands on her every day. And we realized, oh my gosh, this is bad. And we've planned to take care of her physically, but where she's at, we're incapable of doing this. And so through agonizing prayer, we realized, okay, we need to seek out a memory care facility for her because this is beyond us. So imagine this, you guys. I had to sit down with my mom and tell her that her worst fear had come true and that we were going to have to move her into a memory care facility. And while she was living with us, she had turned very angry, very just saying hurtful things to me, which was like, where did this even come from? And when I had to have this talk with her, I mean, she got so angry and said things to me I'll never forget. Those words never even existed in my mom's vocabulary.
She would have never said them, I'm convinced, if she had been in her right place, but she was fearful.
But this whole time, Christine and I are seeking the Lord. We're trying to figure out, what do? We want to walk obediently. We want to do right by her. We want to do right in front of our kids. They're observing this. They're her grandkids that she adores, and they adore her. I mean, there's a lot riding on this, but we have to keep moving forward. And at each step, God was just showing us, okay, there's another step here for you. So came the day, and we moved her into this community. And she literally told us, you don't ever need to see me again. Don't ever visit me. I mean, she was so angry. But what's crazy, we get her there. She starts having, very quickly, she starts having a social life. All her meals are made for her. And in the meantime, I had taken over her entire business life, her finances, everything in her life I had taken over in that.
Can I add a little something?
Yeah.
Also, through this whole time, we had been praying for healing. We had been asking God fervently to heal her mind because we knew she had said many times over the years, please don't ever put me in a home. Please promise me you'll never put me in a home. We had been praying and praying for healing.
Yeah, so in
So it seemed like we weren't getting an answer that we wanted.
It was not going like we envisioned. But as she's there and things are her activities, everything is appropriate to her, she starts relaxing. And it was within 2 weeks. All of a sudden now she was peaceful, she was joyful, she was loving, and even more than she had been before, okay? And what we came to realize, so this is moving forward into something hard with no concept of how it's going to turn out, or if you're doing the right thing,
or that there's even any good ending.
That there's a good ending.
This is a terrible disease.
What we came to realize is, as she's getting everything in the way she needs it, all her anxiety was gone, her fear was gone. She had had a lot of rejection in her life, and that was now she wasn't fearing that.
It's forgotten.
It was forgotten.
She had forgotten it.
So in the midst of this, she's we joke. My daughter Katie said this. She goes, she is more who she was meant to be now than she has been for a long time. But I'm going to tell you, there wasn't a moment along the way that this felt good. Okay, there wasn't a time where I go, oh yeah, because this is going to go. I mean, there was none of that. This was like probably about 4 years of doing really hard things in obedience. We knew what God was calling us to do, and it wasn't, we weren't getting the long term. We were getting like steps of hard things to do, but without the entire picture unfolding in front of us. But that's what God was working on in us. And through that hard time, I had become so frustrated with my mom. It was really hard, and I'm telling you, he has redeemed that because he worked on me through that process. And I have gotten time with her now. I never would have gotten to say some of the things I've been able to say to her because the opportunity is now because of what we did.
And by the way, when you forget all the ways you've been rejected, when you forget all the hurts, when you forget you were divorced and a single mom and all the struggles you went through, that's healing. She's healed. God did answer, just not the way we hoped for.
That's right.
I hear Owen. I'm coming, baby. So we're going to recap the first principle, the principle of hard things over time. The more intentional and immediate our responses to difficulties in life, the less time overall we will spend in hardship. And this leads us to the second principle, which is, and we've kind of been talking about it, the principle of training wheels. It's a good principle name, huh? The principle of training wheels. Our responses to hard things become building blocks to bigger things with less trepidation. So as we're practicing this, as you practice this in small ways right now, you're going to face harder things, and hopefully none of you have harder things, but odds are good you will have harder things. As you face harder things, you will not be shaken in your boots because you know what to do. You know what it feels like. You know you can walk through, and you have a history of God coming through for you when you did it before.
We have an amazing example in the Bible of the training wheels. We're all familiar with the story of David and Goliath, 1 Samuel 17. Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." What do the lion and the bear represent? Those are hard things, but they're training wheels. Those were preparation. And they represented smaller, hard things that God used to build David's faith through obedience in order to fulfill an ultimate plan in David's life, such that when he was faced with a giant, he was ready to act decisively and immediately to embrace the hard thing. It'd be interesting to find out what would have happened with the Philistine if David hadn't had that experience as a shepherd. But what's crazy about that is that set in motion the events that ultimately led him to become king. So you think about it, he's just a little shepherd boy out in the field dealing with sheep, keeping the lions and the bears away. That led to him gaining confidence and security in the Lord for what he was going to have to do when the things got harder, and it ultimately brought about him being king. So a little warning, doing difficult things may lead to even harder things, but the rewards are always exponentially bigger. Would we even know of King David had he avoided the lion and the bear? I don't know, but I kind of doubt we would have. We're going to go into ministry time and some worship, and I just want to challenge everybody here. I can pretty much assure you that with a group this size, there's several people in here, a lot of you, that there's something that is a difficult thing. It's a hard thing that's in front of you right now. And I want to challenge you. We want to challenge you. Can you look at this differently? Can you look at this in the context of God has something for me? He has a plan for me. He has a purpose for me. This hard thing that is before me is not just the hard thing. I mean, it's so easy to focus on what it is. But would we all spend some time as we're worshiping tonight praying about those things and saying, God, can you show me even more than what this hard thing is, what it represents in my life? What do you want to do in the context of the kingdom in my life through this hard thing so that I can go on to do bigger and more things for you in the plans and the purposes that you have for me? So, yeah. I'll pray as we get started here. Lord, we are here this evening. We are grateful and thankful for your goodness and your faithfulness. We thank you for the opportunity to be together here tonight. We thank you for your word, and we thank you for the truth that you have for us in your word, Lord. I pray that you would be with each person here. Lord, for those people who have difficult, hard things before them or that they're in the midst of, Lord, would you reveal to them your plans, your purposes, and what you have for them in this time, Lord. What you desire to teach them, to show them, or to give them through this time, Lord. We submit ourselves to you. We invite your Holy Spirit, and we ask that you would move among us at this time. In Jesus' name.